And joining us now, we have Rich Haynes. He's an agronomist with Sound Agriculture. Rich, great to have you on today. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Jesse. It's great to be here.
I appreciate the time. Just for starters, before we get into our discussion today, I'd love if you can just give our listeners a quick overview, rundown of Sound Agriculture for folks who may not be familiar with the company. What are some of the things you guys do?
Sure, just real quick. So, Sound Agriculture is a life sciences company, and we're really focused on developing new tools and methods for growers to improve their efficiency in the field and their yield, while at the same time being able to reduce some of the impact of synthetics while unlocking or reinvigorating the natural processes that exist between plants and the soil that it grows in. Um, okay, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. No, I was gonna say I didn't mean to cut you off there. Well, as we talk a little bit more about sound and look at some of the things you guys do that you alluded to, obviously, a year like this, Rich, input costs are paramount on the farm. It's a big topic of conversation with our growers, and I think as well we look at when we're growing, say, silage for our feedstocks for our animals. Not only do we want to have nutrient rich silage, but we also got to watch our input costs. So talk about maybe some tips to kind of increase some of that silage production and our quality, keeping in mind here just what the way input costs are around the farm right now.
Well, you hit it really right on the head there. Input costs are, you know, 1.5, 2x in a lot of areas or more. And then availability at this point is actually, becoming an issue. So whether or not you can find it, or then whether if you can find it, whether how much it costs. So when you're thinking about silage, there's two things I kind of consider there. Was it planned? Did you plan to have that field in silage, or was it a change because of something that happened, bad stand or something like that. So if you planned it out, you have a hybrid that you're looking for some big leafy growth there. 100, 150 pounds of in an acre traditionally. So how can we cut back on that in a little bit while increasing the available nutrients to that plant so it has the opportunity to get as much growth as possible. So that's when, real quick, that's when it brings me to Source. So Source is kind of our flagship product. So there's really two: Source corn, Source soybean. We're going to focus on Source corn here, obviously, but
Mhm.
they function in pretty much the same way, just speak a little bit different language, if you will. So there's specific microbes that live in the soil that fix nitrogen, that solubilize phosphorus. These things are well known and are starting to be pretty well studied. It's just some of those processes have slowed down because of the over application of synthetics over time. So what Source does is it's foliar applied, super low use rate, but translocates through the plant to really wake up or reinvigorate that natural process between the plants and the soil to be able to fix atmospheric nitrogen and to be able at the same time to solubilize phosphorus. So especially when you're thinking about silage, we've seen some really interesting things about being able to push growth and also make nutrients more accessible, even in like a high manure situation.
Well, I know as well. You talk about Source, a very interesting product, Rich, and you're thinking about that ROI for our growers here. Unlocking some of those key nutrients that you mentioned, and just uh, finding ways to kind of increase the quality of that silage that we're going to be feeding to our animals. Who I think it's for our dairy farmers, or whether we're talking just our straight up cattle ranchers, etc. There is
Hmm.
a lot of benefit to using Source on our silage, on our operation to kind of benefit things down the chain.
There has been a lot of benefit that we've seen, and we're really actually starting to explore that a little bit more as we expand into this season. But a couple, really interesting examples that we had just from last year. So there was one kind of, it's on our website, sound.ag. You can go on there and check it out. But it's, we worked with some folks out in kind of the central US, the Dakotas, Nebraska area. And they were showing 4.8 ton additional silage on the acre. But one of the interesting things about that is we were also showing around 3.5% in starch, and then 3.2-ish% in digestible nutrients. So, those are pretty interesting numbers when you think about that area of the country, and just kind of the amount of silage you're able to grow on the acre. And then at that same time, we had one of our agronomists, Sarah, spend a ton of time with some big dairies down south, And while they didn't see quite as big of a lift, so it was around they're irrigated, they're a little bit heavier managed, but they were showing, around 2.5, 2.7 tons on the acre additional silage. But the really interesting thing about down there is it was 9% digestible nutrients, 14% net energy, and 16% protein. So, some really big numbers that when you're talking about feed quality, because there's always that graph, right? It's quality goes up, your tonnage usually goes down. So it's how can we mitigate, that drop that comes usually with trying to increase your quality.
Well, Rich, I know as well, as I was looking more into source on the corn side, we think about some of the supply chain challenges when it comes to nitrogen and phosphorus, et cetera. Looking at some of the different things that source does for corn, uh, obviously increasing some of that available nitrogen in the plant, available phosphorus, could be really key for a lot of growers who may be limited on supplies as we get into, say next year's growing season.
Yeah, absolutely. So source, is a really great option for folks. If you're thinking about, if you haven't side dressed yet and you're kind of coming up to that point, yeah, hey, maybe we can reduce side dress by a little bit, maybe carry over some toward next year, and replace that with source. Because with source, we're seeing, especially in areas that are a little bit higher on the inside, so that pound per bushel, kind of as the universities have been telling us for a long time. It's like if you're in that area, maybe there is an option there we can reduce and still see yield increases, 5, 6 bushel on commercial corn, or 2, 3 ton on the silage side, while being able to reduce in by 25 to 50 pounds, depending on kind of where you fall on that NUE scale. Um, which has been really interesting, because with source, and I just want to be real clear. So we're not a microbe; we get kind of lumped in to that bucket. So there's no living microbes in the jug. It's a chemistry that's super low use rate. Easy to mix, rides along with post or with fungicide. With silage, I would kind of recommend going early, obviously, because we're trying to really push that leaf growth. But one of the things that we're seeing is, with that early application, with that early access to more nitrogen, more phosphorus that become available, we're seeing 50, 60% bigger root mass, which is leading or increasing access to things like calcium, boron, magnesium, some of those other things that we kind of look at when we're talking about a healthy corn plant that's going to stand and give you a nice healthy silage plant when you're go to chop it for forage. So
Very true. Well, Rich, I know you mentioned that website sound.ag. Any other final thoughts you have for us today, or any other thoughts to share with growers if they want to learn more?
Um, I would just say, like I said, source corn and source soybean, both fully replied, both super low use rate. Very similar concept on the soybean side. I just focus a little bit more on speaking to those in nodulators to help, with more phosphorus access and things like that. But yeah, check us out at sound.ag. We really appreciate your time and working with us. So thanks, and have a good rest of your season.
Definitely. Well, Rich Haynes with Sound Agriculture, we appreciate the time as well. And again, check them out online at sound.ag. For the American Ag Network, I'm Jesse Allen.